This week, they came out with the tuning changes as they promised in the roadmap. We got a handful of nerfs to overperforming classes, a lot of tier set adjustments, and a few buffs. For Arcane Mage, they nerfed the tier set, which was very strong, and then buffed the baseline to compensate. It came out to be a nerf of 5% single target and 3% AoE. For Devourer, they nerfed the tier set, which was incredibly strong, and buffed the baseline to compensate. It came out to be a large single target nerf at 4% for Void Scarred and 9% for Annihilator. They compensated it with an AoE buff, making this change only a slight nerf in AoE. Note that the Theory Crafters said they were still working on the APL. Frost DK also saw a nerf to their tier set. It came out to be a 2% single target nerf for Deathbringer, and a 5% single target for Riders. Apparently this change is an even bigger nerf in AoE, but I couldn't find the numbers. For Fury Warrior, the tier set got a small nerf and the spec itself got a large buff, totaling to approximately a 4% buff. Arms was unchanged, but Slayer did end up getting a bug fix to execute damage, which amounted in a 3% single target loss and a 2% or less AoE loss. Arms Warrior will still definitely be good. Sub-Rogue saw a nerf to tier set and a buff to compensate. This mathed out to be a neutral change. Assassination Rogue saw a flat 4% buff, and Enhancement Shaman saw a flat 5% buff, which I am very happy about. Demonology Warlock saw a buff to their pitiful tier set, bringing them up by 2%, and BM Hunter also got a tier set buff, which was a 1% buff in single target and 3% in AoE. And then we saw extra tuning on Monday, which was just a 6% buff to Ret Paladin. For healers, we saw large tuning for Disc. They nerfed Disc Priest damage by 28% and then buffed Atonement so it was the same as before. However, Void Shield Atonement healing was not covered by this nerf, so it actually came out as a large healing buff of 4.5%. Blizzard did come out and fix this on Monday, bringing it to only be a 1.5% healing buff. Mistweaver got an 8% buff to healing spells and a small buff to tier set. Note that the healing buff should not affect Ancient Teachings. Resto Druid got a flat 20% damage buff and 4% healing buff, and Holy Priest got a few Oracle changes that I actually think are pretty good for Mythic Plus and will be a substantial healing increase for Mythic Plus, but I am not sure if Oracle will be relevant in Raid. And for tanks, the only tank that was changed was Blood DK, with some nerfs to Sand Lane totaling a 3% damage loss. I think it is unlikely that 3% will change the position of Blood DK in the meta. So that is all the changes. I guess now we can look at what we think will be good in Raid. Here is the sim sheet. I don't want to glaze this too much because it is always very inaccurate. Single target sims are just not very relevant. In Season 1, the top single target classes at this point were Feral Druid and Demolock, and that didn't end up very well, did it? Feral Druid needed like 4 more buffs and it still sucked. But there is a general trend where rogues and warriors and demon hunters are simming high, and mages and warlocks and ret are simming low. Now I made a video about rogues a few weeks ago, claiming that Atrophic doesn't work and that rogues have a poor damage profile. It was actually discovered though that my log data was wrong and Atrophic does work on a lot of the environmental damage in the new raid. This Wispier video went over it in detail. The second argument in my original video was that rogues had a very bad damage profile, and they didn't actually do any work to fix that. All they did was aura buff the 3 rogue specs numerous times. But they did buff the specs so much that they look potentially overtuned, so the damage profile doesn't really matter for now. So I will officiate it. Rogues will not be benched. Now for a prediction on what looks good in Raid, I think the most likely classes to be stacked are these 3. Arms has a very good profile for this raid, Sub seems to be doing a lot of damage, and Disc still does a lot of damage while doing good healing. But Raid predictions are often incorrect. I am sure Echo and Liquid know far more than us. Now we did also get some last minute cantrip tuning on the last day before the season. The OP embellishment Ritual Stone was nerfed by 40%, meaning that it is now equal to every other boring embellishment. If you are thinking of crafting an offhand on Elemental Shaman, do not craft an offhand on Elemental Shaman anymore. The Ulatek neck crit cantrip was nerfed by 25%, but it is still very strong. And the Mail cantrip and Plate cantrip of Ulatek had their stats swapped, so Mail now gives Mastery and Plate gives crit. Very unfortunate to Resto Shamans. But this does throw a bit of a spanner in the works, because a huge question in the community right now is what to roll on and what to craft. And honestly, I cannot tell you what to craft. There are too many factors that go into deciding what to craft. The best craft is probably just the one that is in a good slot they will likely not replace. Now to talk about the M+ meta. This was my previous tier list, and this is an overlay of every spec that was buffed or nerfed this week. I believe there is a bit of a shift in the meta, and I have made a new tier list. Firstly, I will keep Blood DK and Arms on S. I think the nerfs to these 2 specs were only very small, and I think it is very unlikely that you won't play an Arms Warrior in its current state. Below this, I will have 2 separate categories for different comps. I think Arcane Mage is still very good, but I think the specs that it synergizes with are maybe less good now, like Devourer got nerfed and Boomy is maybe a bit sus, for example. Now, if you were to play an Arcane Mage, it would probably be in a caster type comp with a Holy Paladin, and I think Eli Shaman is probably the strongest 3rd DPS there. I think there is a melee comp brewing though. All 3 rogue specs look very good. So in this comp you would be playing rogue and arms, and I think unholy just fits in quite well as the 3rd. It does good overall, it's very tanky, and it can play as the 2nd range on a few bosses where 3 melee is really bad. And then I also think Resto Shaman is definitely the best healer if there is a melee comp. Now in Apes, I have a few specs that I think could be good, but are maybe a little bit low in damage. Devourer was nerfed. Boomy is being criticized for its low prio and single target. Frost Decay was nerfed quite a bit. And Feral is maybe a 3rd spec to play in a Fizz comp or melee comp, but it does have issues with single target and low target cleave. I definitely think with a buff to Feral Druid, it could actually become the Mark of the Wild. Enhanced looks good after it has been buffed, but I believe it will still be worse than the other 2 Shaman specs. In B tier, even though it was unchanged, I have moved Shadow Priest up after playing it a bit more last week. I do think Shadow can do good damage, but it is definitely still unlikely to be meta because I think Priest is maybe not that useful of a class. I also move up Fury and BM after their buffs. My C tier is mostly the same, I just shuffled the Hunter specs because the general conclusion seems that BM is maybe the best Hunter spec in keys. Also, I did move Holy Priest up to C because I believe the latest changes are genuinely quite good for Mythic Plus rather than just like another aura buff that will do nothing. It is Holy Priest though, so I will leave it at C. It will go no higher than C. So this is my updated tier list. And I also actually believe that a melee comp looks more promising than a range comp right now, but that also could just be cope. Now there is still a lot more tuning to come, and if melee are as good in raid as they look like they will be, maybe there will be some nerfs and the tier list will not stay the same. Remember that this is a purely speculative tier list. We haven't actually been able to test any keys with the newest changes. Now, I wanted to give a bit of a channel update. Hello, I am Zorthus. If you didn't know, I am the GM raid leader of the top Oceanic guild, honestly. Last year, we finished in World 9th, which is our best finish in our long time. We did very well last year. But unfortunately, I have to do a lot of work during progression to make it that way. So I will be pausing my content creation for the next few weeks while we are in prog. I do intend to stream our raid, but I won't be very interactive during it, and I probably won't stream or make videos outside of my raid. Also about BlizzCon, I will probably not be going to BlizzCon. BlizzCon is scheduled for the 4th week of prog, and it is incredibly likely that we are fighting Ulatek at that point. And I primarily play the game for progression, so I can't really abandon my guild mid-prog to fly to the other side of the world to go to BlizzCon. But anyways, thank you everyone for watching me this PTR cycle. I had a lot of fun. We did a lot of PTR keys, a lot of patch note reading, and I also cleaned my room on stream, turning it from this into this. I did notice that I am at 29.5k subs right now. I'm very close to 30k, so I figured it is a good time to preemptively thank everyone that has been watching me recently. I appreciate all of you and all of your kind words, and I will see all of you in a month.